Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Jim DeFede. Happy New Year to everyone. Now, there were several interesting stories while I was gone. One that caught my eye was the announcement 2 weeks ago by Democratic State Representative Cassel of Broward that she would be switching parties and becoming a Republican. In a statement she released, she noted, "As a proud Jewish woman, I have been increasingly troubled by the Democratic Party's failure to unequivocally support Israel and its willingness to tolerate extreme progressive voices that justify or condone acts of terrorism." I wanted to ask Cassell about this, but she has not responded to repeated calls and texts. Several of her Democratic colleagues say they've also tried to speak to her, but she's been hiding from them. Now, I certainly hope she's not in hiding. If her decision was truly a principled one and not just an act of political opportunism, she should be willing to come on here and explain it to voters. Otherwise, it's going to look cowardly. So I'm hopeful she will be on the show next week. This week, I spoke to State Representative Michael Gottlieb, who is also a Democrat and head of the Jewish caucus. I started by asking for his reaction to Cassell's party switch.
My reaction was shocked, surprised. Representative Cassel and I are fairly friendly. In fact, we traveled to Israel together this summer with a larger congregation of legislators. And so, I got to know her fairly well. So I was really surprised to see that she was leaving the Democratic Party and doing so sort of without notice to any of her colleagues. Certainly I didn't know. And at the same point in time, I think in terms of a legal mind, it was a loss. She is a very well-respected lawyer and property insurance litigator, somebody who most people in the legislature look to as an expert. So I think it was a loss and a blow to our party. If you're asking me, why she left, I would have to say, I don't know. I know that Representative Cassel had recently been given the position of deputy policy chief in the Democratic Party. And she was certainly looked at as somebody that we were going to have leading the way on property insurance reform for us. I saw her stated reasons, and as a Jew, as a Democrat, I don't believe that the Democratic Party does not support Israel or Jews. I think that's...
Let me hold you there, because let me read what her statement was, because she has not been doing interviews. We've tried several times to reach her, and she's not made herself available. But she wrote in a statement at the time of her switch, "As a proud Jewish woman, I have been increasingly troubled by the Democratic Party's failure to unequivocally support Israel and its willingness to tolerate extreme, progressive voices that justify or condone acts of terrorism." Your reaction to that?
Let's start with the second part there. In terms of tolerating acts of prejudice, Trump had Fuentes and somebody else at Mar-a-Lago. I can't recall. Kanye West at Mar-a-Lago, without telling them or getting rid of them. So that in and of itself is an act of anti-Semitism, in my opinion. When you coddle these people who say and believe anti-Semitic things. So I think you could argue the same for the Republican Party as that statement argues for the Democratic Party. Are there fringes in both parties that are, that stick to anti-Semitic tropes, that again, I'll use the word coddle people who are known anti-Semitic? Yeah, of course there are. Is that representative of each party as a whole? Absolutely not.
But it has become this narrative that Republicans have used, and I think Donald Trump effectively used, to try to get more support from Jewish voters. I mean, he's explicitly said he doesn't understand any Democrat who, any Jewish person would vote for a Democrat. It's almost as if they're betraying Israel by doing that. And he's used that line effectively. And I go back to an incident that occurred in the legislature just in November of 2023, November 7th. It was 30 days after the October 7th Hamas raid, the brutal terrorist attack on Israel. And the legislature came into a special session called for by the governor to enact a different piece of legislation that you just talked about anti-Semitism legislation. And Representative Nixon, a Democrat from Jacksonville, offered a ceasefire resolution wanting to end hostilities on both sides that was greeted with a lot of hostility from both Democrats and Republicans. And I don't want to get too into the weeds on what Representative Nixon proposed. There were certainly some flaws to it and problems with it. But, Representative Cassell was one of the ones who stood up along with yourself to denounce what Representative Nixon was proposing in terms of a ceasefire back in 2023. Do you think that's where this started, her view that Democrats are anti-Semitic and support fringe voices?
So I think the Republican Party has done a much better job than Democrats at creating identity politics. And I think that when you package it like that, that's exactly what this was identity politics. Republicans are more supportive of Israel than Democrats are. And I don't believe that to be true. I think the Biden administration has done an exceptional job providing Israel with the munitions and money that they have needed to wage the war against terror that they have done, and that Netanyahu has done very successfully, so much to the point where many people have called him a warmonger because he is meting out terror every place that he can to make Israel and Jews throughout the diaspora safer. With that being said, when Angie Nixon filed her ceasefire piece of legislation, there was a quiet uproar before it hit the House floor, with many on both sides of the fence telling her, you shouldn't be filing this. It's too soon. It's too raw. And I do think that the debate before, during on the House floor, and then some of the uproar after is certainly what led to Representative Cassell's departure from the Democratic Party.
Well, here's my thought with regard to that. That incident, that legislation was in November of 2023. And by the way, I'll note that it failed on Angie Nixon's resolution failed on a vote of 104-2, with only Angie Nixon and Anna Eskamani, a Democrat from Orlando, voting in support of it. Every other Democrat, as well as all Republicans, voted against it. So it's not as if she had support even within the Black Caucus for that legislation. But if the genesis of her party switch goes back that far, and she's been troubled ever since, I'm trying to reconcile why she didn't make the party switch and run as a Republican for re-election. Why did she wait to win a Democratic safe seat and then switch parties? Does that trouble you at all?
I think that's what troubles many people. And if you saw at the delegation meeting that was brought up the other day by a constituent, certainly as a Democrat, it troubles me in that, we wanted our numbers to grow. And, here we are, we had a safe seat. We had somebody who won. We had somebody who has said that they embrace democratic values and has denounced at many times some of the Republican positions and values, and then switched. And I agree with you, if that was the genesis, why did it take so long to come out? And I think, as many people are saying, it's a matter of, opportunity. Rep. Cassell is vice chair now of the Insurance and Banking Committee, but I can't tell you or speak for her as to why she made the change then. I can only tell you, and I haven't spoken to Rep. Cassell myself, I can only tell you what it appears to look like from my perspective and from what other people are imparting to me, the information that I'm getting both from constituents and other legislators.
I mean, this is the second party switch we've seen since the election in terms of two Democrats now switching over to the Republican side. We may see more. The notion that since Florida is now a red state, if you're a politician with any sort of ambition, with any sort of desire to run for the next level of office, you almost need to be a Republican. Is it, as a Democrat, is this a daunting time for you, and what do you think this next legislative session is going to be like?
I've been in the minority ever since I came into office in 2018. I've been in the minority as a criminal defense attorney for 32 years. I kind of enjoy the uphill battle. So is it daunting to me? No. We're still going to have our wins. But we're here as Democrats to be the voice of the people. And we are going to continue to be the voice of the people. I have seen for 6 years a Republican Party coddle the insurance industry. I have seen a Republican Party make decisions that don't benefit our constituents. And so, no, I don't find it daunting.
Up next, former Proud Boys chairman Enrique Tarrio is asking Donald Trump for a full and complete pardon for his role in the January 6th insurrection. We'll talk to Tarrio's attorney when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back. In May 2023, the former head of the Proud Boys, Enrique Tarrio, was convicted of seditious conspiracy surrounding the January 6th Capitol Hill riot. Now, Attorney General Merrick Garland said Tarrio played a central role in the effort to storm the Capitol in the hopes of preventing Joe Biden from becoming president. Tarrio was sentenced to 22 years in prison, the longest term for any of the January 6th defendants so far. Last week, Tarrio's attorney sent a letter to President-elect Donald Trump asking for a full and complete pardon. After the letter was sent, CBS News Miami's Najee Sherman spoke to Tarrio's mother, who argued her son was turned into a scapegoat.
I don't think that anybody that's actually realistic thinks that there's a doubt about the government using him, using his face, using his organization, using him as a chairman of the Proud Boys.
Trump has repeatedly refused to acknowledge that the violence occurred on January 6th or his role in fomenting it. Instead, he has referred to it as a day of love and vowed to pardon most, if not all, of the more than 1,500 people who have been charged and convicted. Tarrio's mother told CBS News Miami she expected Trump to pardon her son.
Well, as a mother, I'm extremely confident. And as an American citizen, I'm extremely confident that President Trump is going to keep his word.
Late last week, I spoke to Tarrio's attorney, Nayib Hassan, about why he believes Tarrio deserves a pardon.
Look, if you take the statements for what President Trump has stated previously, President Trump has made statements to the effect of nonviolent offenders being pardoned. And you have an individual like Enrique Tarrio, which wasn't even present on January 6th. He had been instructed by another judge to remove himself from the area and relocate himself, and he did just that. He relocated himself and went to Baltimore, and he watched the event unfold, what transpired on the January 6th. So when you take the statements of President Trump in of itself, that's one reason. A secondary reason was we think that what transpired during the trial and everything leading up to it was incorrectly done. So that's where we are right there.
Part of the pardon process, as I understand it, is there tends to need to be at least some sort of acceptance of some responsibility for your actions. What exactly does Enrique Tarrio take responsibility for anything that he did related to January 6th?
So there's different party paperwork that you normally have to file, correct? So in order to file for clemency, you normally have to file pardon paperwork, which is multiple pages, which includes letters in support and those avenues. Well, in this sort of stage we're at, we haven't received the actual documentation that's required by President Trump, by elect President Trump, to supply to the Office of Pardon. What we have in this situation, we have supplied President Trump with a letter from our office, basically explaining where our posture is with our client and what we're asking him to do, which is a full and complete pardon of our client, Enrique Tarrio.
Well, again, I just want to go back to the question. Does he take responsibility for any of his actions as it related to January 6th, or does he think that he bears no responsibility for what took place that day?
It's our posture, and it's always been our position throughout the whole trial that he doesn't bear any responsibility for what transpired on January 6th.
Now, prosecutors laid out their case during the trial, and one of the things that I think was most damning that resonated with jurors were some of the text messages and social media posts and encrypted messages that he sent to supporters. I mean, I know that at one point he said, you know, writing on social media as the events were unfolding at the Capitol, he wrote, "Do what must be done." In the Proud Boys encrypted group chat later that day, someone asked what they should do next, and Tarrio responded, "Do it again." And then he also wrote in another message, "Make no mistake, we did this." Doesn't that suggest that he was taking responsibility? Privately, he was saying he was responsible for the actions of the Proud Boys and others in storming the Capitol.
I'm not going to take credence to the fact that what Enrique was saying was inflammatory in of itself, but as far as accepting responsibility for what transpired on January 6th, you read sort of like the cliff notes of the back end of it, right? So you're reading some of the highlight points. But in order for the government to prove their case, they need to prove that there was a plan, there was an organization, there was something there that led to the planning of what transpired on January 6th. And that's where there's a fallacy in the government's case. There was no planning. There was nothing showing any organizational structure for what happened on January 6th. Nothing whatsoever. Nothing leading up to January 6th. There was no statements. There was nothing in what you call encrypted messaging. So what you're calling encrypted messaging is what we call WhatsApp or what we call Signal, that's not really an encrypted message. We all have those same databases. I have them, you have them, and we all communicate with individuals in foreign countries with those. So it's not like it's a private text messaging line. No, these are just not your normal Apple text that we're getting. This is just a WhatsApp messaging database.
But do it again, you know, after the initial attack, that's pretty damning, isn't it? When he instructing people do it again?
I would agree with you that it's very inflammatory in of itself.
All right. Now, in your closing, because you handled the trial, you were part of a team that handled this trial, and in your closing, you told jurors it was Donald Trump's words, it was his motivation, it was his anger that caused what occurred on January 6th in your beautiful and amazing city. It was not Enrique Tarrio. They want to use Enrique Tarrio as a scapegoat for Donald J. Trump and those in power. Do you still believe that?
I still believe to the effect that they want to use Enrique Tarrio as a scapegoat, and that's why he was sentenced to 22 years for what transpired on January 6th. Is my perception that Donald Trump is at fault. I think his statements may have led individuals to what occurred on January 6th, but is it solely his fault? Is it sort of like the crowd rivaling up and going up to the steps? Was the crowd heated up at the very inception of that day for what was going on from the election leading up to January 6th? Absolutely, the crowd was heated up. It's much like our thought process, and I think one of my colleagues gave the statement perfectly. It's sort of like when a football team wins that championship game and everybody storms the field, or an underdog wins that one game that you have the crowd storming. That's exactly what transpired on that day.
I think comparing what happened on January 6th, in which scores of police officers were injured and hurt, to fans storming a football field and tearing down the goalposts, I want you to be clear about that, because the way it strikes me is it comes across as somewhat insensitive to and minimizing what actually occurred on January 6th.
I don't take away from the actions that happened on the front lines, correct? So my client at all times, and if you read through his colloquy where he made a statement on the day of sentencing, he basically apologizes and basically gives reflection to those officers that were on the front lines, that were impacted, those that had psychological issues as a result of it and suffer mental health issues as a result of it. We absolutely feel for those individuals that had those effects. But as far as what led up and how the effects of what transpired on that day on January 6th, I mean, you're talking about the effects of thousands of individuals within a 30-minute window going up into the Capitol, going up onto the front lines, and then thereafter breaking the multiple barriers. Because in fact, there were 3 different barriers that were set up, and leading into what occurred on January 6th and going into the United States Capitol. So I don't take away from the officers, and so to this day, I still feel bad for those officers, as I basically, during our trial, told those officers and apologized for what happened to them on January 6th.
All right, I want to, what exactly would Enrique Tarrio's plans be if he were pardoned? I'm assuming he would come home here to Miami. This is where his family is. This is where he grew up. What would his plans be? Would he continue to engage in politics? Does he renounce any association with the Proud Boys going forward? I guess I'm trying to get a sense of what the future would look like for a pardoned Enrique Tarrio.
Well, Enrique Tarrio is not a part of the Proud Boys anymore. Before he even was arrested, he had already removed himself from the Proud Boys in of itself. And Enrique Tarrio going back home would be a working young man that has a bright future ahead of him. He had 2 businesses before him going into custody, and he'll go back to running businesses and going back to a working, productive member of society.
Do you see him as, I know a lot of people who have gone to prison during this time and come out have tried to portray themselves as martyr and tried to financially benefit from it and sort of set themselves up as continued antagonists. I'm thinking of Steve Bannon, I'm thinking of Roger Stone, I'm thinking of others. Does Enrique Tarrio see himself in that role? In other words, does he see more politics in his future, one way or the other?
Based upon what my understanding is, no, we don't see more politics out of Enrique Tarrio. What we see in Enrique Tarrio is going back to being a humble young man, trying to finish off the rest of his life being a working, productive member of society.
We'll be right back after the break. Before we go, on Thursday, I was watching the funeral for former President Jimmy Carter. I realized there are those, including the incoming president, who enjoy demeaning his presidency. They are wrong to do so. His achievements in office, including the lasting peace between Egypt and Israel, are substantial, and his time out of office are nothing short of inspirational. Watching the funeral, I was struck by the eulogy former President Gerald Ford wrote. Now, President Ford died in 2006, so it was delivered by his son, Stephen. Here is part of it.
According to a map, it's a long way between Grand Rapids, Michigan, and Plains, Georgia. But distances have a way of vanishing when measured in values rather than miles. And it was because of our shared values that Jimmy and I respected each other as adversaries, even before we cherished one another as dear friends.
I know those days of respect and civility are long gone, but do they have to be? Just a thought. If you'd like to share your thoughts with me, my email is jdefede@cbs.com. Thanks again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.